Hi, I'm Louise, and this is Escapee. So I was binge watching crime shows on YouTube, and I stumbled across an Australian series about crimes in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. More than a few times, they kept talking about these criminals that escaped from prison, some of who'd been out of prison for long periods of time. I grew up in Australia, and I was vaguely aware of the criminal prison break or two, but honestly, it seemed like there were so many. And so my little inquisitive brain went, what's going on? Like, why does it seem like every other prisoner they're talking about has escaped? So I started looking and researching, and seriously, I fell down a rabbit hole. A old and interesting prisoner escapes through the ages, and not just in Australia. It turns out there's lots. My little writer's brain wouldn't let me sleep. I was up all night, right? Interesting factoids, trying to figure out things. People have been fascinated about criminals escaping, and it's terrifying, like when it's happening in the moment, like, oh my goodness, this really terrible escapee as prisoner has escaped from prison, is now an escapee and is on the run. Like, these people are dangerous. They really should be behind bars. But at the same time, once it's over and done with them, perhaps the prisoner's in jail or enough time has passed and maybe they've died and we don't have to worry about them anymore. It's really exciting. Like, this person managed to get out of jail. They managed to make a life out on the run. Movies are made, stories are told. So I figured, maybe some of you might be interested in hearing some of these stories like I was. And then I had to decide where to start. Obviously in Australia, and I could talk about some of these prisoners from the 80s or 90s or whatever. So, or I could start with Alcatraz, or the notorious and famous serial killer who's escaped twice. And I'm sure you'll cover those. I'm sure I'll cover those. But the idea of lesser known but equally ingenious escapees appealed more. And perhaps the ones that weren't American. So whilst down this rabbit hole of escapees, a single introductory sentence caught my attention and held it. So to quote, prisoners have been trying to break out of Australian prisons since William Buckley fled authorities in 1803 and coined the term Buckley's chance, end quote. Seriously? An incredibly popular term in Australia has been around for over 200 years and was initiated by a prison escape? I had no idea. For those who haven't experienced an Australian and Aussie conversation, I'll give you a quick rundown of the term. When an Australian tells you that, when you tell an Australian that you're going to do something a bit crazy, they'll most likely give you a big grin, a slap on the back, and an almost dismissive, mate, you've got Buckley's chance. Or Buckley's chance of doing that. Or Buckley's a none. Most often, you've got Buckley's, mate. While this might seem like the person is telling you to don't even think about it, Aussies being Aussies, it actually translates to, that sounds completely impossible, and I'm going to love seeing you succeed, basically. So we're going to talk about William Buckley. William Buckley was 198 centimetres, which is roughly 6 feet 6 inches tall. Oh my God, the dude was huge. Even by today's standards, that's really tall. I mean, the average male in Australia, probably worldwide, is usually around 5'10". Some of the Nordic European countries, it's up maybe around 6 foot. So to be 6 foot 6 inches tall back in the 1800s, oh my goodness, it's huge. Anyway, an acquaintance, George Russell, described Buckley as a tall, ungainly man and altogether his looks were not in his favour. He had a bushy head of black hair, a low forehead with overhanging eyebrows, nearly concealing his small eyes, a short stub nose, a face very much marked by smallpox, and just such a man as one would suppose fit to commit burglary or murder, end quote. That general description was echoed by other reports of the day, although not always as flattering. He was generally represented as being of low intelligence, though biographer Marjorie J. Tipping stated, quote, according to his assimilation into an unfamiliar way of life may also suggest that he was intelligent, shrewd, and courageous, end quote. Buckley was also known as the Wild White Man. He was an English bricklayer and served in the military in the 4th King's Own Regiment of Foot. And with his height was given the role of pivot man for the regiment. And he had a good reputation with his officers. In 1799, his regiment went to the Netherlands to fight against Napoleon, under the command of the Duke of York. It has been suggested that upon returning with a severely injured right hand, he fell in with a group of less than savoury soldiers. His military service ended in 1802 when he was convicted of knowingly receiving a bolt of stolen cloth. He insisted that he was carrying it for a woman and did not know that it was stolen. The courts didn't believe him, and aged somewhere between 22 to 26, he was sentenced to 14 years as a convict in Australia. His court documents suggest that he was originally sentenced to go to Sydney, though he would never have been told this. This was information that the courts knew. They didn't tell the prisoners and things, that sort of stuff, before he was loaded onto a ship and sent off. Buckley left England in April 1803 aboard HMAS Calcutta, one of 2 ships sent to Port Phillip to form a new settlement, under Lieutenant Colonel David Collins. They landed in Sullivan Bay, near what is now a popular summer holiday spot, Sorrento. Hi, Sorrento! In October 1803. This was by no means a prison in the traditional sense. I'm assuming it was like tents and maybe some small buildings, basic huts, beginnings of buildings, because that's what they were there to do. Skilled workers like Buckley would have been utilised to build the settlement. Remember, he's a bricklayer. Information states that guards, well, soldiers, I guess, and unskilled convicts encamped together, while skilled labourers, including Buckley, lived in huts near building sites, dividing the camp in 2. Adding to the struggles for escapees, pre-colonisation Australia had plenty of protein sources for hunting, though not a great deal of gathering plant-based options, and the landscape would have been completely alien to convicts from overcrowded, industrialised London. And not to mention the animals would have looked really weird. Anyone who has spent any time in Sorrento, hey, I spent most of my childhood in Sorrento, and know from personal experience that the soil in this area is not great. It's sandy and brackish. Growing anything not native is almost impossible. And even the native stuff that does grow is usually oddly formed. The wind blows oddly, coming off the ocean. There's a lot of salt. It's really not great. And there's not a lot of fresh water sources. So this makes a really crappy a place to attempt a settlement. So finally, the colonists leaders realised this and made a decision that they're going to move back down to abandon the site and move off to Van Diemen's Land, which, is modern day Tasmania. Most Australians know this. So the penal colony in Van Diemen's Land has always been known as an awful place to be sent. So this led to Buckley and 5 others escaping during a rainstorm on the 27th of December in 1803 to avoid going to Tasmania. I can only imagine how hot and sticky and muggy this rainstorm was. Remember, December is summer in the land down under. Oh my goodness, that rhymes. Oh dear. So it's stated they hope to get to Port Jackson, though they never actually went in that direction. So I don't know how true that is. Port Jackson is a colony now known as Sydney. So anyway, of the 6, Charles Shaw was shot by a soldier captured with another convict. David Allender surrendered to Lieutenant Colonel David Collins on January 16, 1804. The 3 remaining men subsisted on rations of food that they had brought with them, as well as seafood and berries that they collected. No surprises that they struggled to find enough food and fresh water, as the idea of bush survival techniques would be at best basic, though Buckley was military trained and I'm sure could have camped and made do, though any experience was gained in an agriculturally developed environment with no snakes, rather than this hot Australian bushland. I am honestly in awe of how far these men travelled. Shown on the map, they travelled along the coast of Port Phillip Bay, which in 1803 was known as Kings Bay, before being renamed in 1805 to what's now Port Phillip Bay. They made it to what is now Melbourne, and then across the plains to the Yawang Hills, now called the Yuyangs. They finally ran out of the last of their rations and realised that to survive, they needed to return to the bay for food. They doubled back to the west side of the bay in what is now Corio, Victoria, and then to Swan Island. Along the way, they avoided huts of Indigenous people. The men attempted to signal a ship anchored in Port Phillip Bay without success for a week. Buckley's 2 fellow travellers decided to walk back to the eastern edge of Port Phillip Bay, while Buckley decided to try his own luck. Now, keep looking through all of this stuff when I was doing my research, and so I couldn't find the names of these 2 men, and I don't think they were actually recaptured. I have a feeling that they died somewhere along the coastline, never to be seen by Buckley or anyone else again. I don't know. That's just my general consensus. I'm sure if I dug really, really, really deep, because there is a lot of information on this stuff, I might be able to find out who they were, but yeah, couldn't find anything obvious. Over the next several days, Buckley became increasingly ill due to dehydration, starvation, and had painful sores from poor nutrition. Buckley was near death when he arrived at Airlie's Inlet, where he found embers from an earlier fire, fresh water, seafood, and a cave for shelter. This cave actually still exists. It's on a map, and you can actually go and visit it. I believe it's underneath the lighthouse. It's on the map there somewhere. He stayed a while to build back his strength and then followed the Victorian coast south to a spot near a stream where he established a hut for himself of tree branches and seaweed. He foraged for plants, berries, and seafood to sustain himself. He spent a lot of time wandering around trying to survive and was eventually taken in by and cared for by local Aboriginals, becoming a proficient hunter, earning respect and learning their language. He was given an Aboriginal wife and said that he had a daughter. After 32 years and barely remembering how to speak English, Buckley walked into John Batman's camp near St Leonard's on the Bellarine Peninsula. A tattoo of his initials, WB, confirmed that he was the same convict who escaped in 1803 and had been presumed dead. Batman moved his camp from St Leonard's to the current site of Melbourne, where Buckley then received a pardon and acted as intermediary and interpreter between colonists and Aboriginals for 2 years. His loyalties were consistently divided, and he felt he lacked the trust of both sides. Disillusioned, he finally went to Tasmania, the place he'd rather escape prison to avoid. Such irony. Buckley obtained employment and married. He was in his 70s when he died in 1856. Now, one of the reasons why there's such a slight discrepancy between the age when he was shipped off, they said between age 22 to 26. They just say that he was in his 70s because a lot of birth records weren't very consistent. So it's not known 100% how old he was, but around in his 70s. So that is a condensed version of the story of the escape of William Buckley. If you want to know more, there's movies and documentaries and archives of information, not to mention sites of significance, and of course the term Buckley's Chance, which has been used in its everyday Australian language for over 200 years. Seriously, guys, if you enjoyed this one, please do all the clicks, bells, bings, all that fun stuff, all those lovely supportive things that content creators ask for. Anyway, have a good one, and I hope I'll see you next time. Thanks.